But this talk, I'm going to talk about the uniqueness of man, and I want to encourage you of how you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and encourage you that God has made you for far more than survival. God has made you to be an intelligent, skillful being. So often we take things for granted, especially in this atheistic world we live in. But we should be so thankful to God for all the gifts that he's given us. And I want to show you how we are so different to apes or any ape-like ancestor. Sometimes you hear in the media the claim that we're only 5% different to a chimpanzee. Well, I argue that we're 100% different to a chimpanzee, because I'm an engineer, and engineers look at how things perform. It's not just the genetic code and the information. What's crucial is what we can do. And when you look at what we can do, we are just 100% different to apes. So that's what I'll show you in this talk. As Terry said, there's a battle of worldviews, the atheistic worldview, the Christian worldview. According to the atheistic worldview today, man is just a hunter-gatherer, had just evolved from apes. Man is not over-designed. Man is just designed just to survive, just to reproduce, just to eat food, just to play around. To give you one example, students in universities are taught that the reason for our hand and our fist is so we can throw a punch at our neighbor, to punch our neighbor in their face. That's not a very good thing to teach a child just before they go to the playground, that the purpose of their fist is to do that. But that is what evolution does. It gives us a low view of man. It says we are here to fight, to rape, to be selfish. That is what evolution says. In my talk, I will argue that our hand is designed to play the piano and to do great, skillful things. So this is why it's such an important thing. So there is the biblical worldview that man is made in the image of God. Man is a special being. And as I shall explain in my talk, man is over-designed in a purposeful way. We're made for much more than survival. We're made to be musicians and artists and authors and craftsmen and to do skillful things. The evolutionist has a big problem to explain the skill of the human being. A picture of a few Norwegians. Norway do very well in the Winter Olympics. And if you look at ice skating or gymnastics or sports like this, you see the elegance and the beauty of the human frame. And I think some people will see gymnastics and skating and they'll think, is it really true that humans really came from an ape-like creature? Many of these things show us that man is special. I've done a fair bit of research on the human body. As I explained yesterday, I've done research on the human knee joint, but also on feet and jaw and a few other parts of the human body. I've done this work myself in the laboratory with my own hands, and I can tell you from personal testimony that man is fearfully and wonderfully made. So this was my motivation to give talks and to write books on this area. In fact, I've written 2 books on the design of man and the uniqueness of man. One a book and one a booklet. The booklet I call In God's Image, but really it's a summary of my book, and it explains 10 specific areas of the human frame where we are particularly unique, so different to the animals, in particular different to apes. And I'll go through these 10 areas now, and I hope this encourages you to see how you are special in the sight of God, and how you are fearfully and wonderfully made. So we'll just go through these 10 areas. So the first one is our unique bipedal design. There are thousands of mammals in the world, but only one mammal stands on 2 legs. So an ape is a 4-legged creature. It walks and runs on 4 limbs. So in a way, an ape is closer to a dog than a man, because an ape is a four-limbed creature. This is a complete difference, 100% difference. Now, to stand upright requires many design details. From head to toe, we have specific design features that enable us to walk upright. We have balance sensors in our head for upright walking. We have a flat face. All of our joints are designed to walk upright. So we have thousands of design details that enable us to walk upright. I'll just focus on one particular area, which is our feet. From a mechanical point of view, our feet are very special. And the reason our feet are so special is our foot has an arch, a beautiful arch structure. Engineers like this because at the top there is even a keystone. If you ever look at a man-made arch, you normally find a keystone that locks everything together at the top. It also makes it an irreducible structure. So there is the arch. And that arch is really important because it means you can feel the back of your feet and the front of your feet, and it gives you confidence when you stand. If you're someone who's born flat-footed, you feel giddy when you're standing up because you can't feel the front and back of your feet. So it makes standing really easy. We are designed to stand. But it also means that we can push off the front of our feet. It means you can play sport, because sport is all about standing on the toes to change direction, to accelerate. But in the case of an ape, they have a foot like a hand, which is good for gripping branches, but it means that apes cannot walk in the way humans can. They certainly cannot run because they cannot push off the front of their feet, and they can't balance carefully. So yes, an ape can stand up on two legs, but it feels like doing a handstand for an ape. It's like standing on their hands, and they cannot do it for very long or go very big distances. But also, humans have three-point contact on their feet. If you could put a color dye on your feet and stand, and then look at the bottom of your feet, you would see that you have three-point contact. And that is the perfect engineering interface with the ground, because that's the most stable thing. But apes don't have that three-point contact, so they cannot stand on one leg. It's very easy for a human to stand on one leg, because you just put your center of gravity through those 3 points. But an ape cannot do that, which is another reason it cannot run or play sports in the way that a human can do that. So our feet are so different. And if you look at supposed ape men, like Lucy, you find that there's no evidence that they had an arched foot. The foot is a really key thing to look out for when you're looking at supposed ape men. Either the fossils, either they have an arched foot, which shows it's a human, or it doesn't have the arched foot, that it shows that it's an ape-like creature. So the feet are really important. You may not think your feet are special when you put your socks on in the morning, but they are very, very special from a mechanical point of view and also a creation point of view. And so our upright stature gives us a unique ability to be agile on two legs. Humans can carry things whilst running. No creature can do that, run on two legs and carry something. So you have these special sports. I don't know if you do this in Norway. If you don't, you should start playing rugby. It's a good sport because it demonstrates the human ability to run and carry at the same time. In my own research, as I explained yesterday, I produced a prototype knee joint inspired by the human knee joint. And one of the things I noticed producing that, this is true of the human knee joint, is that it locks in the upright position. So if I stand like this, it's really easy to stand because my knees are locked and I don't have to tension my muscles to stand. But in the case of an ape, they have to really tense their muscles to stand up because their knees do not lock in the way that ours do. So this is the first thing which marks out human beings. They stand upright, they're bipedal. Then the next one, which is related, is our skillful hands. Because unlike other creatures always use their forelimbs for fighting or locomotion, but our hands are dedicated to creative, skillful tasks. And human hands are unique, particularly because of the pinch grip. We can make a pinch grip with each of our fingers and the thumb. And we also have fine muscle bundles in our hands as well, which gives us precision movement in our fingers. And so you can see we can make the pinch grip at the end. And it's that pinch grip which is the key to the skill of the human hand. If you could look under the skin of your hand, you would see a picture like this. This is from Gray's Anatomy. And as an engineer, looking at this picture, I find it incredible, very humbling, because you see the incredible skill involved and precision of design. What Gray does, he dissects to a different level on each finger. So the index finger is showing how this tendon here has a spiral wrap, as if a craftsman has spiral wrapped a cover around the tendon. Then notice on this middle finger how the tendon splits on each side. The reason it splits is to make the joint smoother so that pianists can play the piano at great speed because there's no resistance in the joints. There's incredible precision and design in the hand. This is the robotic hand that I produced myself, and it has hardly any of the skill of a real human hand. When you try to copy part of the human body, that helps you appreciate how wonderfully designed the human body is. And so the human being has great skill with their hands, but so often we take it for granted. I don't know anyone here if you can knit or do crochet, but it's something you might think, well, I learned it and I can do it. But if you look at it in detail, it's an incredible skill to do that. And all of us do skillful things with our hands, whether it's cooking, crafts work, even driving, even dressing involves skillful work with the hands. We tend to take this so much for granted, but what we have in our hands is an amazing design. And just to give you another example of over-design, our hand is perfectly designed to make a tripod grip with our middle finger, index finger, and thumb. So we can hold a pen. And I absolutely believe God designed us so that we could hold a pen, so that we could paint and write. But those little details are so hard for the evolutionist to explain. How did they explain that we could only survive if we could hold a pen and do writing? They have to make up some story, like there were cavemen, and only the cavemen who could fill in a tax rebate form could survive because they saved money. And those are the kind of stories you do hear when you hear about the explanation of all these things. But when you think of the skill of humans to play the piano and play the violin, and when you look in detail, the skill involved is incredible. Some pianists can play up to 20 notes per second with absolute skill. And that is not what you'd expect if we had been hunter-gatherers. But that is what you'd expect if God had created us to be creative beings. So the evidence is there before our eyes. Biblical creation makes sense. Then a third thing which is unique about humans is our skin. All of these things I'm saying, secular scientists would agree that these things are unique to humans. If you read a biology book, it calls humans the naked apes. So we're like apes, but we're just naked. But the reality is our skin is wonderfully designed. It's an amazing part of us which is unique. We have a unique skin, a unique subcutaneous layer of fat to insulate us. We have unique sensors in our skin, very fine touch sensors that we may appreciate and enjoy the sense of touch. Another really important thing about our skin is that we can adjust our clothing. I mean, our clothing has an important spiritual reason because Adam and Eve, when they sinned, later they needed to cover. But another practical advantage of clothing is that we can adjust our clothing. This is something animals cannot do. If you have a dog, you might notice that if your dog gets hot, it takes a long time for your dog to cool down. All it can do is stick its tongue out. But we can adjust our clothing, and that means that we can play hard and work hard. And I think we have over-design as well with our skin. Our skin does not have to be so sensitive just for our survival. God has given us skin that we might enjoy the sense of touch. God has not just given us all things richly to enjoy. He's also richly given us the senses and design that we may enjoy all things as well. So then we come to, this is my favorite one, number 4, our unique facial expressions. Again, this is something we tend to take for granted. Our facial expressions are a very important part of communication. Even this day, you may have reacted to someone's facial expression and not realized it, because we can communicate faster with facial expressions than we can through words. Sudden joy or shock or sadness or danger. And it's amazing how God has given us a physical design that complements our spiritual design. He's given us a physical design to express our emotions. Just imagine life without being able to make a facial expression. They're very important, but they are unique to humans. If you could look under the skin of your face, you would see these intricate little muscles all around here. In the case of an ape, they only have 26 facial muscles, and they have none for facial expressions. But humans have about 50 facial muscles and about 24 dedicated for facial expressions. Textbooks in schools will often point out that apes and humans have a similar number of bones, something like 207. But what they don't say is that we have a completely different number of muscles, and that is what makes us so different, like our facial muscles for making facial expressions. What do you think these tiny little muscles are for down here, those connecting the top of the lip with the cheek? They are for smiling, for making a smile. So how does evolution say that we could only survive if we could smile? And why aren't there some people in the world, like Swedes or someone, who can't smile? How come they couldn't survive? Everyone has been able to survive. So why is it that everyone can smile? It's very difficult for the evolutionists to make up some story to explain all of these details. So we can make many types of expressions, many types of smile, many types of frown. If we consider the smile, then this is a picture of my son when he was 5 years old, and showing you just a little smile. Actually, scientists have counted how many expressions humans can make and how many we can recognize. How many do you think it is? If you were an evolutionist, you might say, well, I think it's going to be about 10, because the whole point of evolution is you get only what you need to survive. And we only need 10 expressions to survive. A couple of smiles, a couple of frowns, a couple of angry. And that is the whole point of evolution. You don't get anything more than you need. Well, scientists have added them up, and the answer is 10,000 facial expressions. And that is exactly what you'd expect if God had created man. God gives in abundance. The Bible is very clear. God gives in abundance, whether it's, and I'll be talking about that later, about God's provision in creation, God giving in abundance. This is exactly what you would not expect if we had evolved from apes. So you see, when you look at the detailed design of the human body, biblical creation makes complete sense, and evolution makes no sense at all. I asked my son to give me some examples of facial expressions. So I said to him, how do you look if I have caught you being naughty? And he said, this is how I would look. So he's quite good at acting. But this is illustrating how good the human being is at making different expressions. This is illustrating how many different expressions you can make. I then said to him, how would you look if I told you what your punishment was going to be? And he said, I would look like this. So you see the ability to, and this is just a 5-year-old child who can make these expressions. Then I said, how would you look if I told you you're completely forgiven? And he said, I would look like this. And so some smiles, some cheeky smiles. Actually, just one other point on facial expressions. Another unique thing about humans is you can see the whites of the eyes. For those of you who have pets, if you might know that if you're looking at your dog, sometimes you're not sure where your dog is looking because you cannot see the whites of the eyes, the sclera. And this really confuses evolutionists. They think, why is it that we can see our direction of gaze? Because in the wild, it's really dangerous to see your direction of gaze. God has protected animals by not showing the sclera, because predators look for the face, predators look for the eyes, and then they capture their prey. So God has protected prey by hiding the direction of gaze. But humans are different. Why are we different? Because God knows that we need to see the direction of gaze in communication. He wants us to know who is looking at us across the room. And he also knows we have the common sense to know how to avoid predators like lions and tigers. So therefore, he made us different, exactly what you would expect. So what confuses the evolutionist makes complete sense to a creationist. Sometimes it's the little details that show there is a creator. In my book, I talk about eyebrows. Eyebrows are a tiny detail. I'm a squash player, so I really appreciate eyebrows, so I can carry on playing squash without the sweat going in my eyes. But how can an evolutionist say we could only survive if we had eyebrows? We could only survive if Professor Burgess could play his squash without sweat going into his eyes. It's those little details, I think, that, to me, encourage me to see that biblical creation is true. Then we have unique language and speech. I don't know about Norwegian, but in the English language, we have up to 1 million words, different words. How many words are there in an ape's language? It's 0. This is what I mean about we are 100% different to apes. Apes don't have a language, and we have a huge language. And scientists have even monitored language to see how much we speak. And scientists, again, are quite confused, because if we were hunter-gatherers, we shouldn't speak so much, because a good hunter doesn't speak too much. And so people have said, why is it that the average man speaks 4,000 words a day? I think it's much higher for creation speakers, but this is the average. And they've also said, why is it that the average woman speaks 8,000 words a day? And before the men feel smug, this means that women are over-designed twice as much than men. But it turns out that speech is like a miracle of design. We so take our speech for granted, and we forget how hard it was to learn to speak, because we did it as 2-year-olds, as 1-year-olds. But speech is an amazing thing. As you speak, your tongue is changing positions like this. You don't think about it as you speak, but your tongue and your vocal tract is changing so that you make different sounds. And our whole mouth is supremely well designed for speech. Our mouth has the same depth forward as the height of our throat, which is just right for the resonance of sound. And we have all these muscles that can change the vocal tract. And we have fine lips and tongue so that we can release pressure, pa, ba, and do very skillful things with speaking. And not only that, but God has given us a computer and software in our brain that does amazing processing of speech in our head. It's a miracle of design. I don't know if you've ever been to Great Britain, but if you ever do, you must come to listen to a Welsh choir, because the Welsh choirs are very famous for very beautiful singing. And some people have sometimes said to me, what do you think is a simple, powerful evidence that God created man in a special way, as it says in Genesis? And I think a simple but powerful evidence is the ability of humans to sing beautifully. How does evolution explain that we could only survive if we could sing with great beauty and skill? How can that be necessary for survival? But this is exactly what you'd expect if God had created us, because he wants us to sing praises to him. So our ability to sing makes such sense. Do you see how all the details of the human frame make so much sense in a biblical worldview? Then we come to childhood. And once again, human childhood is so unique. Human childhood lasts up to 18 years, although in the modern world, children seem to be wanting to extend this to 28 years. But in the case of animals, they have to mature by the first or second winter. Only with humans do we have this long childhood. And our brain grows in an amazing way. We are so different. And of course that makes sense, because God wants us to be brought up in the protection of the family. God wants us to be brought up with learning within the family. The family is very special. One thing I find very sad, when I read a biology book and I read about the unique childhood, in the biology book, what I read was it's really strange that humans have this long childhood. It makes us really weird. It means that babies, it's like they're born premature, and it has a really low view of the uniqueness of man and even childhood. And I find that really sad, because it should be something to celebrate, that human childhood is so special. But evolution has such a low view of man, that man is just an ape-like creature, and it cannot see these wonderful design features that God has put into man. Another unique feature is unique marriage and reproduction. Although in modern society we're trying to ruin this, but this should be a unique feature. Only humans are aware of nakedness, and only with humans is marriage for companionship, primarily. In the case of animals, they only form partnerships to produce offspring. Only with humans do women have fertile periods all through the year. If you look at other mammals, that's not the case. So we have birthdays all through the year. A woman's time of ovulation is hidden with other mammals. You have some sign, some color, some smell, but with women it's not. And there are many other features as well about reproduction. One of them being the way the baby's skull deforms during birth. So that, again, humans are so different to apes or any past ape-like creature. that supposedly could have been an ancestor. And then humans, of course, have a unique intelligence and brain, that grey matter we have. And many scientists are in awe of the complexity of the human brain. One unique aspect of our brain is the part of the brain that controls our muscles. That's the motor cortex. And a quarter of the motor cortex is dedicated to controlling the muscles in the hand, showing that God has given us the computer software to give us skill in our hands, not just giving us skillful hands. And a quarter of our motor cortex is dedicated to the muscles of the face. So half of our entire motor cortex dedicated to our hands and face, showing that we are designed to be emotional and skillful beings. And humans have an amazing ability to memorize information. Around the world, there are competitions. One of the competitions is to memorize the number pi, which you might remember from your school days, 3.14159265385, and it goes on. And it's a really hard number to memorize because there's no pattern to it. The numbers just go on randomly, so it appears, and it's really hard. But there are these competitions around the world. The world record is held by a Japanese man. Most of them are held by Japanese men because they're very obsessed about memory and things. I don't think any women do these competitions. I think they're too sensible to memorize the number pi. But the world record is held by a Japanese man who knows he spent his whole life learning pi, and he knows it to 42,000 decimal places, and he doesn't make a single mistake doing that. A very silly thing to do, but I'm glad he did it because it illustrates the power of the human brain. But a more serious example is this. In 2002, a child in Holland had a very serious brain disease, and she had to have the whole of the left side of her brain removed, and the doctors told her that she would lose her ability in language. She wouldn't understand them, she wouldn't be able to speak, because she was losing the whole of her speech center. But then a few years later, something like 5 years later, her parents brought this child back, and they told the surgeons that the child was now fluent in 2 languages. And the surgeons said, "I'm sorry, that is not possible. It's just impossible." And they checked the child, and they saw that it was the same child, and her brain had rewired itself, and she could speak 2 languages. It was actually 4 years later. And the lead surgeon said, "It was amazing. I told my students to forget all the neurophysiology that they were learning." It was a very humbling experience. I think this is a wonderful example of over-design of the human being. In England, we tell our children, if this girl with half a brain can learn 2 languages, then you must be able to learn 2 languages, because in England they don't like learning foreign languages. But humans also have a unique beauty. You've probably seen this picture of Vitruvian Man before, but you may not understand some of the features in this diagram. Leonardo da Vinci, the great scientist, when he drew this picture, he realized that with a human being, if you put your arms out, the distance from fingertip to fingertip is the same as your height. So if you are 1.5 meters in height, it will be 1.5 meters from fingertip to fingertip. So you fit inside a perfect square. And there are other proportions in the human body as well. If you do a star jump, the center of the circle is your belly button. And scientists have marveled at the elegance of proportion of the human body. Of course, every animal is beautiful in its own way, but there is something special about the beauty of the human being. But most importantly, human beings have a unique soul. So humans have an ability for rational thought and self-awareness. I have a wonderful dog, a Chihuahua, belongs to my daughter. And even though it's really intelligent, it doesn't have self-awareness. It doesn't wonder if it's the best looked after Chihuahua in England. It doesn't have that kind of rational thought. And humans have a unique ability to appreciate beauty and to have emotions. In fact, part of our brain is dedicated to the appreciation of beauty. Animals don't stop to watch a sunset or to listen to birdsong. If they did, nature would collapse if they stopped to look at beautiful things. And we have powers of choice as well. Every second, we are making a choice of what to think, what to say, what to do. Animals follow their instincts. They don't make choices in the way humans do. And this is the reason that humans fall into sin, because some or even many of the choices we make every day, we are making choices that harm our neighbor or disrespect God. And that's why we have a conscience. And that's why the Christian gospel is so important, because all of us are sinners before God. That is why God needed to send his son Jesus into the world, that we might have a savior if we believe in him, and have our sins forgiven if we believe in his death on the cross. I should make a caveat that even though you can see so clearly that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, obviously humans are not perfect, because sadly there has been the curse on creation, but the Bible explains the source of that curse. It's right back in Genesis, the rebellion of Adam and Eve. So whilst a knee is a wonderful design, arthritis is a really bad thing, but in the original creation, before the fall, before arthritis, the knee was a perfect design. Just to mention, just briefly at the end, some objections that you might hear. Some people, like Richard Dawkins, claim that the eye is badly designed. He claims that the eye is wired backwards. And the reason he says that is because when light goes through the eye, at first sight, it appears to have to go through the retina, through the nerves, and then to get to the light-sensitive cells. So Richard Dawkins says this is a really bad design. But what he does not realize is that a few years ago, scientists discovered these amazing Muller cells in the back of the retina that act like optical fibers, and light is guided through these optical fibers, and so the light is not degraded by these nerve endings as Dawkins thought. In fact, what it's been found is that these amazing Muller cells actually condition the light signals. They block out reflected light, so the light actually gets improved as it goes through the retina, not degraded. And engineers now want to be inspired by that to produce better cameras. So what Dawkins thought was a terrible design actually is a supremely good design. So that was a big mistake that he and others have made. Another objection, people ask about vestigial organs, and supposedly our appendix is a vestigial organ, some relic from past evolution. But there have been published papers showing that it does have a usefulness in the immune system, particularly for younger people. And like a few parts of the body, we can survive without certain things, but it's not ideal to have those things removed. So it's not true to say that the appendix has no function. Often the problem is a lacking in our understanding as opposed to a problem with the organ itself. Just one last example I'll give in terms of objections before concluding is the laryngeal nerve. Now you might have heard of this objection. I would say the nervous system in the human body is just an incredible design. And so it's rather sad that Richard Dawkins would say this recurrent laryngeal nerve is obviously a ridiculous detour because our nervous system is so wonderfully designed. If I explain what he means, this is the larynx where our voice is produced. And what you can see is there's a nerve from the brain that goes straight to the larynx, but there's also another nerve that comes right down and back up again. So this is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. And Richard Dawkins says, this must be a ridiculous detour. This must be a mistake. The first thing I would say is you have to be careful about saying something is badly designed if it works perfectly well. And that nerve works perfectly well. So he has no reason to say it's bad design other than his opinion. Also, Jerry Coyne in the United States said this is one of nature's worst designs. Now, this is really close to my heart, this particular example, because when I worked for the European Space Agency, I had to design wiring. I had to design kilometers of wiring on some of the most advanced spacecraft we have produced. So wiring is something that I know quite a lot about. And not only have I done wiring, but I teach wiring to my students. And when I'm teaching my students how to do this kind of wiring, on my first lecture, I say to the students, the best wire loops often have loops. So if Richard Dawkins and Jerry Coyne had come to my first introductory lecture on how to do wiring, they would not have made that mistake. And I want to show you, I want to illustrate this. This is ENVISAT, the world's biggest Earth observation satellite, and this is some of the wiring on ENVISAT. This is the wiring I did myself. I had to get the wires from the spacecraft to this solar panel. It was about 30 kilometers of wiring. I had nearly 300 wires coming up here. They had to go round the hinges and up to the solar panels. Notice there's a loop and there's a loop. There's a double loop. And that loop is actually very similar to that loop you saw in the human nerve. So why, on this spacecraft, why did I put those loops in? One is I had intermediate connections. There are some temperature sensors here, and there are some micro switches. So in fact, if you have good eyesight, you can see some wire. There's a wire there breaking out. So I've got all these wires going on this, but I have a breakout wire on an intermediate connection. Secondly, for redundancy, I have two separate routes, one here and one here. If one breaks, the others can keep the spacecraft going, so it's safety. Thirdly, it allows motion. I don't want these wires to be so stiff that this solar panel cannot deploy. And fourthly, the engineers have to be able to assemble the whole system. So I also have to design it for that. So loops are really common. So if we go back, this loop is exactly what I would expect as an expert in spacecraft design who has been teaching and practicing for 30 years. To me, this makes complete sense. But you have Richard Dawkins, who's never designed anything, saying, I think that doesn't make sense. But then he just does not know what he's talking about. Those four things I mentioned for the spacecraft all apply to the human laryngeal nerve. There are intermediate connections, one to the trachea, one to the esophagus, just like my temperature sensors. There's redundancy. It's been found that soldiers who've been shot in the throat, often they do not lose their voice because you have a redundant system with a nerve up there and a nerve down here. It probably helps movement not to have too many wires going in the same place, and there are probably growth constraints as well. So this is exactly what I would expect from a creator, God, based on 30 years' experience of advanced engineering design. But sadly, millions of people are being told that this is a ridiculous detour this is a mistake by people who know nothing about wiring or relevant knowledge in that area. So I find that very sad and very frustrating. So just some brief conclusions. The Bible has a really high view of man, that he's made a little lower than the angels. Evolution tells us that man is made a little above the beasts down there. But the Bible says that man is made a little below the angels, crowned with glory and honor. There's a professor at Oxford University who says this to his students: "We are just a bit of slime on a planet." And people wonder why so many young people have mental health problems when this is what they're being taught. This difference between a high view and a low view of man. So what is the purpose of our design? We are designed for great things. I think it's no surprise that if you go back 2 centuries, in Europe, you have brilliant music by people like J.S. Bach, brilliant artists, and art seems to be going downhill, and not surprising with an evolutionary view of man, not this high view of man. And of course, we're designed for fellowship with our Creator. To me, the human design does not make sense if we are just here to live for 70 or 80 years. But our design does make sense if we are designed for eternity. So man is physically unique from head to toe, a unique spiritual being. And a key point that I've made is that we are designed for far more than just survival. We are designed to be creative, skillful beings. So often we take things for granted. So I hope you are encouraged in your faith and not to take anything for granted about your body again. Thank you. God bless.